Broadcasting from the commodity capital of the world, Zurich, Switzerland, this is Insider's Guide to Energy.
This edition to Insider's Guide to Energy is brought to you by advantageous. Go to www.advantageous.com for more information.
Welcome to Insider's Guide to Energy. I'm your host, Chris Sass, and with me is co-host Johan Oberg. Johan, what's going on?
It's all good, Chris. And for once, I think I'm entitled to say it's good to be on because I actually missed the last episode. But I hear through the grapevine that you did a great job. So good on you.
Well, at least one of us had an extended vacation. Did you go anywhere interesting?
I did, actually. So there's a lot of things happening Easter break. So we took a little bit of a European tour. The great thing about being in Switzerland, we were able to travel around up to Belgium and back through Germany. Really interesting as well, because the more you drive in Europe, the more of this energy transition you see with all the wind parks, solar parks all over Germany, but also with some of the scary things of the rising water levels across the Belgium and the Netherlands. So always a little bit of an eye on the energy and the sustainable future that we're looking for.
Well, cool. I'm glad.
What about you?
Just been busy here in Zurich and enjoying the Zurich freezing spring. Looking forward to getting another episode going. What do you think's going to happen tonight? What's your plan for this evening?
I think this is one of these episodes where it combines what we've been looking for, and when we set up the show a little bit, we talked about the energy transition, we talked about sustainability, we talked also a lot about storage across it. But in order to do all this, it needs to be connected and it needs to be driven by digital, and you cannot do that in the way we've probably done it in the last 100 years. So new technology will be the forefront of this whole thing. So I'm really looking forward to see how do we work, and how does this actually work with smaller assets, flexible assets, through blockchain, through AI, etc. So I think we're looking forward to a digital speech, but who knows?
All right. Well, let's find out if you're right. I love to hear what markets do, what happens with the digital world, and how we go. I'd like to introduce Juergen Mayerhofer to the program. Juergen, welcome to the show.
Thanks, guys. Happy to be here.
So you heard my colleague speculate of who and what you might do, but we say this every single show. Johan and I know who you are. We invited you to the show for a reason, but our audience has no clue. So I would suggest we start with a little bit about who you are professionally.
Okay, that's the easy one, right? I'm since 20 years in the energy industry. I'm a trained software engineer, worked as a consultant all over Europe. All projects related to the energy field, always software and technology. So ETRM systems, scheduling and logistics, algorithmic trading, and finally ended up as one of the co-founders of Enspired, trading flexible assets in a fully digital setup. So I guess that's why I'm here.
All right. So Johan was not off. We're going to talk digital. That's kind of what I thought was going to happen. But that's a pretty high buzzword. Maybe a little bit more about what that means. What do you guys actually do?
So what we actually do is we take every type of asset. So when I talk asset, it's a generation asset. It could be a demand side. It could also be a storage asset. So an asset that could generate or consume electricity. And we trade that in a fully digital setup. That means we don't have any human traders. We don't have the trading floors that you would have in mind, with a lot of screens and people with these chairs and all that stuff. So if you would join us in our offices in Vienna, you would think you enter a software company. So not the typical trading floor flair that we have here. So we work with GitHub and continuous integration, and all that software stuff, and we combine those two well. So we trade flexible assets, but not in a way you would expect it from other players in the market, but rather in a software, data and technology driven way. So no humans doing some stuff. Data is imported, algorithms and models take decision, and everything is executed fully automated. So while we talk, we trade for a lot of clients, different use cases, and no human has to have a look at it.
So how do you make this work? It's an interesting analogy, and I think it's something that we'll see in the financial industry as well. Not quite a few years ago, they start talking about robo trading and all the rest. But we still have a lot of trading floors around the world of energy trading. So what would you say today, and I'm pretty sure we'll go in the future as well, but what would you say today then is the big difference between what you're doing and more of a traditional energy trading floor? Because it's still fairly digitalized, even if there are shares and screens. So what is the difference?
So there is, I would say, basically two ways it's done at the moment. One thing is really trading as a human, so sitting in front of 12 screens, 14 screens, looking at market data, weather models, satellite images, price forecasts, and taking a decision. So the information is processed in the trader's brain and combined with experience. Good traders take good decision, and other traders take also decisions. They're maybe not as good, right? And what happened since 2015 in the short-term power space is that you're allowed to trade electronically on European exchanges. And so with software, we tried, or the market tries to automate some of the trading decisions, right? But there is a huge difference between just automating stuff that has been decided or having models that take active decisions. And I would say the state of the market is that trading is supported by software, right? So signals are still human stuff, or there is specific models. So I would say most of it is automating trading. So it's not taking the decision. Like you have a wind forecast, you have to sell 12.8 megawatts, and you say to the software, please execute, right? So there is not too many logic. Of course, you can optimize quite a lot if in execution. But of course, if your forecast or your signal is wrong, the best execution cannot fix it, right? And comparing the approaches that we see in the market with what we do is different, because we use way more data. A lot of signals are order book database or are triggered by humans. So we use a lot of data, put it into models, and take real-time decisions. So for example, when we train our models, we know on the 2nd of March 2021, 3 p.m., that was the wind forecast available for decision making in the system. So not when it was released, but when was it there for the algorithm or the model to decide what was the residual load, what was the wind level, how steep was the solar curve. So we know that, and our models react for every product differently based on time to deliver and all that stuff. So we just stepped up the game with getting everything digital and a heavy bet on data and machine learning.
So are both sides of the equation all digital at this point? So you're got the one side, right, of the transaction. You're going with good data. You're hoping to make better decisions. I think with data, for me, it's never a question of if there's enough data. It's actually refining the data down to useful data, right? So there's lots of data.
Unfortunately, there is lots of data. Quality is an issue. Timing is an issue, right? When do you get the data that you would be interested in? Do you get it in the quality that you would need? Because you have to have in mind the setup for 24/7 human trading it's not dependent on something, right? It's not dependent on data quality, on a system, whatever. But when you have a 24/7 setup, everything has to run without any issue, right? If you have wrong data in, you trade positions that you don't want to trade. If you have wrong forecasts, you maybe take wrong positions. So the whole process has to be super automated and has to have high quality and consistent quality of data. So that's a big difference in that game.
And the other side, the original part, the first part of the question, are they able to handle this kind of speed? Is Is it a full end-to-end automated process, or is it just one trader that's automated?
It depends now what the other side is. We have two sides. One is the customer's assets, right? So we have assets that are fully automated that we trade until some minutes before physical delivery. But we also have customers that have to press the proof button, right, as a security step, because it's critical infrastructure and they don't want somebody else to maybe ramp up or down the big power plant. And on the other side, we have the exchange where everything is automated. The thing is, I mean, you see if you look in the data when humans are trading and when not, based on the behavior, based on the how it's traded. So you clearly see when traders jump into the market and when they go home, and so you still see quite some patterns out of humans.
So do you see any, out of curiosity, before I got a lot of questions about technology and risk and who's actually accountable for what, but just out of curiosity, I think if you look at any trading floor, commodity trading, in this case energy, it is automating, it is digitalizing, and eventually, according to a lot of people, it will be a kind of an automated process. But what would you say today is, if you're the fully automated side of the equation, how far has the more traditional energy companies or energy trading is coming? How much of their processes are automated today, and how far have they to go?
It's really super subjective in the gut feeling, but I would say 20 to 30%. So it's like you have to think we have a very specialized setup for spot markets. It's actually unfair to compare us to one of the biggest players in Europe, because they carry decades of history, of legacy systems, of processes. It's not only the trading component, it's the risk management, it's the invoicing, it's accounting. So you guys know what ETRM systems do. And we actually don't need that, because we have real-time position tracking, real-time limit tracking, but we can only do that because we're exclusively focused on the spot market. So as soon as you broaden your product range, go into forwards, futures, you need different processes. And that's what they have. So I think for them, it will be really tricky to get the end-to-end automation done, because there is different departments. So our organizational setup is different, right? We have squads that work on topics, and they are cross-functional. There is data scientists and trading operations and augmented traders and software developers working together. And if you're a large utility, you have sliced and diced it into front office, back office, logistics, all that stuff. And we as a small company can handle that in one go. So that brings a lot of efficiency. And we had this big advantage of building it greenfield like that, right? We founded the company and said, okay, nobody's trading in CompTrader, right? That's not the way how we do business. If you want to trade, write a model or an algorithm. And if you have to transfer from building a trading floor over 2 decades into say, hey guys, you don't trade anymore, you're software developers now, that's quite a big challenge, I would assume.
But does that also mean that, because one of the challenges, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you look at some of the larger energy trading floors, is the volume aspect. It's probably not as interesting of trading and utilizing small flexible assets, car batteries, or whatever needs to be done. Do you think you have an advantage here where it's automated? Can you cope also with the smaller volumes, or the smaller than the others? Or
there is 2 things I think you mentioned that are very important. One is, of course, if you have a large asset base of gigawatts of generation capacity, collecting some 10 megawatts of a flexibility may seem irrelevant in the absolute figures context, right? For big companies. So I think it's also tough for them to have a focus on this 10 megawatt battery, right? Because you have other assets that make you way more money. You maybe have some hedging strategy in futures or you maybe also in gas business at the moment. So that the numbers are super small compared to that business. On the other hand, I think everybody, even if they don't tell it, they know that the future will be decentralized, and that flexibility lies rather in aggregated small assets compared to, I mean, you cannot build a pump storage, right? I mean, you can build it, but then the energy transition should be done already quite some time ago until it's there, right? So I think everybody knows that they should focus on small stuff, but their strategy and organizational goals doesn't make their life easy, right? On focusing on small assets. We of course have the different approach. So we don't any assets, so we only trade third-party assets. We believe that the energy transition will work with a lot of small assets that sit idle, because until now, most companies said, okay, sorry, that's not a business case. That's too small for me. That's not enough euros. That's a lot of work. And you have to keep in mind, all the other markets that we're talking, you can trade them manually, right? You can trade futures manually. You can trade your hedge in forwards manually. Until spot auction, the process has been developed over the last 10 years. But for trading on a continuous intraday market, you need a lot of technology. You need 24/7. You need all that fancy stuff that you didn't need so far to maybe reap 80% of the revenue or of the P&L, right? So I think you need, as you said, some economies of scale, and that just doesn't pay off for doing it for 3 CHPs. So you have to have a business model like we have and really do it for a lot of different parties.
So is that the problem statement that you started out to solve then? So you realized that there was this kind of stranded small assets that weren't getting taken advantage of, and that's what you started your company for?
Actually, it was two things. One, we have seen, I mean, we've worked with more than 40 players all over Europe, big ones, and we've seen that everybody focused on renewables. So trading the position, trying to avoid imbalance, a lot of them being subsidized. So they were not primarily interested in the prices they achieve with trading, but just to get rid of the position and avoid imbalance risk. And that was one topic where we've seen there is a lot of big assets that could be provided on short-term markets, additionally to ancillary services, so really in spot and intraday. And the other thing is we've seen that it's quite a big step for smaller, medium-sized players, energy-intensive industry to get into that market. So it's already tough for big utilities, as we have talked before. It's quite an investment in technology. I mean, they can do it. They have the knowledge. They have the money. But for medium-sized players or an energy-intensive industry, it's kind of impossible, right? There is no business case of building a 24/7 trading desk to trade your 3 CHPs that you actually build to produce heat for your production, right? So our idea was to help, or we crafted or shaped the business model in a way that we can serve everybody, from the big utility that has this special asset in this one country that no trader wants to trade manually, but also help the paper mill or whatever it is, energy intensive industry, to say, okay, guys, you built it for heat, the asset, for example, but you could ramp up some additional megawatts and help somebody in the market because there were not enough renewables, and somebody has to jump in, and you can actually jump in, make money, and help the energy transition. So that was the idea, but having a slight tendency that we know the future will be decentralized and there will be a bigger target group with smaller assets.
You mentioned in the pre-call batteries. So you've spent a good bit of time over the last few weeks talking about batteries. So maybe share a little bit about what that's all about.
Batteries is, I would say that's the holy grail of the energy transition meanwhile, right? So over the last years, everybody talked about we have to increase the speed of building wind parks, PV parks, onshore, offshore, whatever. And also over the last year, I think a lot of people realized that it's not so easy for the grid, right? You cannot put endless stress on the grid, and we have Einsmann in Germany and congestion management meanwhile everywhere. And batteries have this beauty of that they can cover multiple use cases, right? You can put them standalone to help the grid. You can put them next to your generation unit. You can put them into your production facility to be a backup, to maximize PV own consumption. You can put them next to a wind park to move it from low price timeframes to high price timeframes. So there is a lot of use cases, and it seems like over the last months that basically every different market role, from asset developer to utility to consumer, understood that battery has a value.
Yep.
And I think what helped it is that with the energy crisis, this increasing price levels, volatility just gave a kickstart to the intraday market, right? So suddenly, for batteries, it's not only ancillary services. So in continental Europe, it's mainly frequency containment reserve. But you got an additional route to market where you could say, okay, I have a choice, right? Do I take market A or B? And maybe I have a third case saying my primary target is to maximize own consumption. And then with the idle flexibility left, I can choose between two markets, which helps makes the business case more stable than 3 years ago, because you had one market and either you made a lot of money there or you made, not too much money there.
Not so much.
So going back a little bit, I think we all agree that batteries is kind of the holy grail. I like the expression, but it's going to be a massive part of this. And I think that's kind of a common theme across all the episodes we've done, storage in one way or the other. One of the things I just want to go back to a little bit in terms of yours specifically, and that is, who is your customers? If you look at it today, but maybe even more than into the future, what we see is more, okay, you move from this consumer to this, from consumer to this prosumer setup where we actually will produce the energy, but you will probably then also store the energy. Where do you see your core customer group in the future, but also maybe mention some of them today?
So I can tell you how it's today. So it's utilities, from top utilities in countries, smaller utilities, it's asset operators, so renewable operators, it's direct marketers. So it's rather, I would say at the moment, it's storage operators. It's rather it says there is a tendency for the generation side at the moment. I think because it's easier for them, they know their asset, they know about trading, so it's easier than the hardcore demand response use case. I think it's just tougher to explain it to the client. There is more technical restrictions, so I think that will play a bigger role in the future. Also in an aggregated way, our clients are also aggregators, so companies who aggregate a lot of small assets that would be too small to trade themselves against the wholesale market. So for example, that the smallest contract size is 100 kilowatt on the exchange. So even if we want, we cannot trade a 50 kilowatt battery, right? It just doesn't work here. So you have to pre-aggregate them, trade them or commercially optimize them, and then distribute the dispatch signals. So I would expect that in the future there will be more aggregator roles. So really people building more and more virtual power plants. I would assume that a lot of utilities just see that as natural part of the business. At the moment, this fancy thing, and we have it, they don't have it, and why don't you have a virtual power plant, right? So I think that will be go from fancy to normal stuff. I think that also when we go out maybe 5 years, it will also be coming closer to the B2C customers. So at the moment, households are just, that the metrics don't work out. You need a certain volume. You would have to aggregate a lot of customers. Regulations don't even help you that much. I mean, UK is slightly different, but try to access a heat pump from your client without being the supplier, which is horrible, close to impossible. So I think there is some regulation work involved over the next 5 years. And once a lot of virtual power plants have been built, granularity will get smaller and smaller, so that people say, okay, I want to aggregate 2,000 B2C electric vehicles, right? I think now that's a fancy proof of concept and it may technically work, but I think it's quite some time until it's commercially really viable. So I think that's why it's going from big asset generation side to demand response, mid-size, and I think just finally we as consumers at home will be a target. Would be my expectation.
So on that journey, you say, I think you said your customers tend to be mid-size or maybe someone a little smaller tends to be your sweet spot. Are they doing customization on your platform, or is it just a service that they sign up for? So what exactly happens? So what do you do for me if I have a bunch of assets and I come to you? How do you help me get them on the spot market?
So it usually runs. If you would stick to our process, you would get. We would decide for a use case, right? You may have a small pump storage. You have a thermal generation. You maybe have some demand side capabilities or hydrogen generation, whatever, right? We settle on a first use case. Then typically your first question would be, okay, now Juergen, tell me what's the value of my asset on this intraday fancy optimization thing that you do. So we would ask you for historical data, or we draw up an artificial case, and we give you a value indication of how much 10,000s of euros per month you can earn. And then the technical integration is actually really easy. You just tell us for tomorrow or during the day if we're allowed to ramp up or down your plant. What are the marginal prices for every quarter hour? We have to talk upfront about the technical restrictions. Are there RAMs or minimum run times or that type of stuff? And then we go live. You test us. You watch on your iPhone on the real-time dashboard, super fancy in black, and like you would expect from a tech company. And you wake up in the morning, and the first thing you do is you look at how much money you earned overnight with your asset. And if you're convinced, we enter into a longer term agreement. So we are very open that clients just try us, right? So we don't want to sell this 5-year fixed fee contract and talk you into something. So we want to prove in the real trading environment that we deliver what we promise.
So, but that sounds pretty labor intensive to scale. It sounds like that there's a lot of hand holding to get started. So you're a relatively young company, and I know recently I think I saw you over in North America as well. So you're trying to grow. So how does this scale?
Scaling is a sense of technology in our world. So a colleague just called it last week. We call it mass customization, right? So we have core trading strategies and models, right? We have a core optimization that can deal with storage, no matter if it's a pump storage, a heat storage, or a battery storage, because the concept basically is the same and the market data you need is the same. So what we do, we train that models to your technical restrictions. Let's say you show up with a battery and you say, okay, my guaranteed terms say 1.6 cycles per day, not more cycles than X per month. That's my efficiency loss. That's the maximum charge discharge. We consider that, retrain our models, optimize our parameters with backtesting, and take it live. So that maybe sounds labor intensive if you would do it manually, but we have all components in place and we just retrain the models to your needs. And if Johan would show up then and say, hey, I have this other battery, we just repeat the process with different numbers and then take it live. So we try to get rid of all hurdles and complicated stuff, right? And you would get an upfront information of what we think we can earn.
So I can understand in the future of the energy world, I think this is, I totally agree with this, the future. But if we look at where we are today, we've already discussed the kind of the clash between the new and the old a little bit in the energy industry. So here you are, looking like a software company, behaving like a software company, calling yourself almost a software company, even if you have a long background in energy. But what is kind of the feedback, or what is the impression when you then go to customers? Are they ready to take on this? They invested in an asset. They are used to maybe an old, let's call it a legacy way of working. And you come here and say, you know what, we're going to do this. We're going to revolutionize this for you digitally. How does it work?
Yeah.
Are they ready?
That really depends, right? We have people, and that's kind of close to a quotation to say they have just been waiting for a service like ours, right? Fully transparent, real-time monitoring on your iPhone, and they just were not happy with the offerings existing at the market. So transparency is a problem at the moment. I think it's also still a lot of misunderstandings what flexibility marketing or trading is, right? Some say, I already do that. I sell this remaining 10 megawatts in the spot auction, right? And then go for lunch. And I market my 10 megawatts flexibilities. Others say, okay, I do that since 10 years because I go into AFRR or FCR, that's what they mean, ancillary services. And I think not many people think of the whole range, right? To optimize across markets and say, is it smart to put the battery at zero with zero price into FCR just to get some revenue? Wouldn't it be better to have a limit price because we have an expected volatility on intraday and try to get the best of both markets? So I think in my experience, in a lot of calls, we have to clarify what's the difference to what they do. If they say, okay, we're not interested, we trade already our flexibility, we say, hey guys. And even if you talk intraday, there is different approaches, right? You can propose a dispatch to your client or your assets, and they can decide if they do it or not. We have the approach of that they tell us their idle capacity, and our models react in milliseconds to the market, right? So we're in the lead. They tell us the restrictions, and we take the commercial optimization decisions. So even on intraday, there is totally different approaches of say, hey, Johan, I have a suggestion for you. Do you want to ramp up, right? That's also intraday flex optimization, but it's far away from 24/7 algo trading with 10,000s of trades. So that's a topic still.
I think this is a topic for everyone because we're in a transition. So I think it's still. But coming back to that a little bit, one of the things that will be interesting because we're talking now about the customers that you have. Are they energy savvy enough to understand all this? Because if we look in the near future, because I think it's in the near future, we look at a lot of new organizations. If you look at the B2B side, they are coming into this energy production. They're putting solar panels on their roof. We're talking about electric cars in the basement, which then connects to batteries. Suddenly you have customers that might not be, let's call them energy savvy, that they are doing this for sustainability reasons or they're doing it for financial reasons, maybe not purely on saving energy. So how does that work? Are they a big kind of an opportunity for you, or are they more difficult to work with because the energy savviness is not there?
Yeah, I think it requires different business models or product approaches, right? Think at home, what do you do if you change your supplier, right? You take the best tariff, you maybe have a look and say, okay, maybe I don't want to have 80% coal production in there, so rather take a green thing. So there is some expectation. And I take the example of B2C flexibility, right? Even if you would have a dispatchable heat pump, maybe a charging station for your EV at home, you most probably won't want to think about too much. I would have to show up as a supplier and say, hey, Johan, I can offer you this 10% off on your energy bill if you let me access your heat pump and your EV, right? Be it vehicle to grid, vehicle to home, whatever, right? So I think for B2C, not energy savvy target group, the product has to be super easy, and you maybe just want to tick that additional box and it happens magically, and you have a monetary benefit, for example. So there's a lot of studies with real-time pricing where, we're just humans. We fall back into the same behavior. We don't want to start our dishwasher at 2 in the night because it's 2 cents cheaper, right? It's not convenient for us. So you would have to have an offering for the not tech savvy that just works magically. And I think that nicely fits to my prediction that I had, who will come next. It's also from energy savvy to convenient target group. So at the moment, even if you talk energy intensive clients, they are either they are already energy savvy or they are now, due to the energy crisis, becoming energy savvy, right? a year ago, they maybe haven't been interested. It was a commodity that they tendered every 2 years. Meanwhile, I think everybody, no matter if it's household clients or no matter what industry, getting plus 50% on their energy bills leads to focus on the topic. And I think if there is one positive thing with the energy crisis is that it created a lot of awareness, right, for that the energy transition doesn't come for free. So I think people get more energy savvy at the moment.
What competing strategies are, so you've got a strategy, right? You're looking to help solve a problem. What are some of the competing strategies you're swimming against, or what are you trying to, like, what are other alternatives that people are looking at to solve the same problem?
I mean, some of them maybe don't see a problem at all, right? They say, okay, I didn't do it for the last 10 years. It's effort. My job is producing a certain good, and I'm not interested in that. So, I mean, we don't have a strategy for that one. If, we cannot convince everybody. There is certainly some thoughts about companies that use a lot of energy or manage assets, if they should get closer in the value chain to energy trading, right? So we're talking to asset operators of renewables that think, okay, maybe I don't sell this stuff via PPA, and then I think about a battery, and maybe it makes sense to get more familiar with trading. And is there a small fraction of the value chain that I could also take over? Does it make sense? So we see over the last years quite some movements where people get more interested, so they don't just want to sell it via PPA because they realize it's an insurance, right? You pay somebody for taking a volume, a price risk, whatever. So I think they get more educated and get more curious. And of course, there is companies, strategic decisions. They say, I built this on my own. I'm a trading company. I'm a utility. That's my core competency. So we play it very open.
Yep. And are there regional plays that are different? Is the North American market significantly different than the European market?
We just had some initial chats in North America. So at the moment, our focus is really scaling in Europe from our initial markets: Germany, UK, Austria, now to France, Netherlands, Nordics, Iberia, Italy. So I can say if there is a huge difference in mindset or not.
Which is, I need coming back to this, because you mentioned a little bit about the competing. Chris was also interested in the competing approaches. But once we're talking about competitors, and also combining that with a digital approach, surely with the energy crisis and even before the energy crisis, there are other larger, not energy companies perhaps, but larger IT, bad word to use maybe, but software companies and IT companies that are also looking to dip into this a little bit. Do you see some of the major ones also coming and say, well, we can do this? The big tech dragons, or is this still a bit away from them due to competency and focus?
I think some of them really looked into that market. So there have been cases already some years ago where big tech companies bought metering data in Europe, etc., which was where a lot of companies were afraid if they enter or not. I think it's really tough for them to enter this physical market, right? What distinguishes the spot markets from other and also financial markets, it's the physical restrictions, the weather dependency, the grid constraints, all that stuff. So I would rather say that maybe other players join. I would not expect tech companies, but maybe EV OEMs. Now imagine you buy a new EV and a brand says, hey, here is the EV. Do you want to have the insurance? And do you want to have the energy? And do you want to give me access to your battery, right? To provide flexibility to the market. So I think they could have the advantage of being very close to the customer, right? In every other setup, especially when it comes to EVs, you have the utility that talks to the customer, or maybe there is so many players
Yeah.
in that space. So I don't see tech companies, but I would assume that people really close to the customer, maybe selling PV panels or whatever, start to contract that stuff. So I think utilities try to do that, of course. I mean, you can lease and buy PV stuff everywhere, but there's a lot of small players that try to craft different value propositions than the typical utilities. So as we do, basically.
Yeah. But I think it's a challenge, of course, because there's a different, not just a technology difference, it's also an offering and a support function, which might be slightly difficult. We've seen Tesla as one of them, of course, with a trading license in the UK and also an energy provider in the US. But the other OEMs have always challenged with bringing on the new parts. And as an OEM, you're also then suddenly responsible for the customer relationship, which traditionally they haven't been. So I think there's a business model here that could change.
I think the offerings have to also get more complex, right? So I mean, I brought up the EV example, but actually you could even go into home automation, right? Because you mentioned it before, the prosumer task, you will have this excess PV. Do you feed it into the grid and get a certain tariff? Do you give it to an aggregator who gets, maybe depending on the subsidies you get in the market, or trade it on the wholesale market? Do you feed it into your EV and save it for later as a battery? Do you use it to produce heat for your whatever boiler? So I think that this is just one missing piece, and in the future people will go more and more into this holistic optimization, because they will see, okay, there is some opportunity in just optimizing an EV, and but the next step would be, okay, there is a PV on the roof, right? Why don't I consider that? And there is maybe a stationary battery, and there is whatever asset type, and maybe a heat boiler that they could reduce consumption and all that stuff. So I think in that space a lot will happen, and the question is, who will be the entry point for that? Will it be the EV guys? Will it be the utility? So I think it's pretty open. There is a lot of different players. Will it be the heat pump provider? Will it be the electrician, right? That says you get the heat pump, you get the PV, you get the EV charger, and maybe you sign up the supply contract with them, right? Because these guys are involved before you even build a house or renovate the house, right? Why not them? So.
No, but I think I think you're totally right on this one, because I think where we look at it, this has been the biggest challenge in any transition: who actually owns the customer and combine it. From your point of view, I guess this is positive, because it's very difficult to recapitulate the algorithms and the trading formulas for the energy trading. So if you can provide it as a service combined with your solars, with your PVs, etc., it's only good. But the question, I agree with you, still remains: who owns this customers? Who can manage this? I guess that's
at
a
the
big
moment
question.
it's very separated, right? There is people owning the battery of the client. There is people having the supply contract. And who are you going
to call when something goes wrong? That's always my biggest problem.
and as every consumer, you want to call one number, right, for all the problems.
Of course. And the OEMs are not ready for that. That's for sure.
I have some experience. They are definitely not ready.
No.
So I guess, interesting. I mean, I think you guys are pontificating about like end consumers. I think we're a bit away from that kind of panacea of kind of managing or arbitraging in your own home and getting the best deal for your energy. So I think we're probably still at that mid-tier step, right? As you said, you're focused mid-tier. But what comes to my mind is you guys have been doing this for a while. You've proven the market out. You've got, you're basically, your sales model you described was, hey, give us a try. We don't want to tie you up by contract. We want to tie you up because we bring you value. That's what I heard you say. But you must have learned some lessons along the way. Nothing comes easy. You don't get to where you are without having some lessons learned. So what are some of the things that were different than you expected when you went into this?
So what we did initially, of course, we right after and even shortly before founding the company, we give some pitches, right, to friendly customers of the past and people that I got to know, just to hear their ideas on how this would work out. First of all, I think I thought that everything is clear about flexibility, right? So I thought there is a certain market standard. So do you go there and say that's my offering and everybody understands it? So we had to work a lot on simplifying the offering. I would say making it as easy as possible for you to try it. And there is hurdles we removed technology-wise, hurdles that we removed contract-wise, hurdles that we removed in our commercial or in our pricing, right? So that's something that we learned, that the same business idea in a different wrapping, right, makes a big difference, right? Because the business model of doing trading as a service for a client, it's not the business model innovation where I say, wow, I've never heard that before. But having it fully digital, making it super easy to use with your iPhone dashboard thingy, is a different story. So we learned that it has to be super easy to try out. The other thing we learned is that, and it was not painful, but it was a surprise for me, that I think in the first 200 calls I asked, do you know the value of your flexible assets on intraday markets? And there were not even ballpark figures in the first 200 calls, right? So people know it somehow for ancillary services, they know it for spot auctions because the price is transparent. But for intraday, the prices go like that for the same quarter of physical delivery. And if you look at an index, you get just the average, volume weighted average, right? So there is no public information where you could get a feeling of, is it going wild or not? You have to be a trader to know that. And most of our prospective clients are not traders like we are. They're somehow energy savvy, as you called it, but they don't look at the trading screen or the dashboard every day. So solving the transparency thing was a big topic. So that's why I said our sales process, meanwhile, is we give you an indication, because you want to know very early in our discussion, A, is this interesting, and B, does it pay off for me, right? You wouldn't work with
you're baselining for them in the
Yeah.
trial.
Yeah, we even go farther at the moment that we talk about floor pricing, so guaranteeing minimum revenues, etc. So we really try to find out what is this thing that, everybody understands. We have ESG guidelines, and it's good if I contribute to the energy transition, and it's good for employer branding. But there is always, of course, this aspect of making money, and we try to find out what do you need to say this? Okay, let's give it a try. And
so I love to have real-time stories of things as success stories. So give me a success story. Give me the best case scenario that you've had. Talk about someone you brought on. You don't need to give me the names, but tell us how it worked, why it was a success.
we have one success story that was one car, renewables. So we meanwhile trade more than 500 megawatts. One of the case studies is Priogen, Germany, and where we trade their intraday deltas. And they were super fascinated by offerings, said that's exactly what we need. And I think it was even in the first call, when can we start trading? 2 weeks, 1 month, etc. So this was really a success story where our service was, or offered that flexibility to fit into a client process of jointly optimizing positions, etc. And they said, okay, that's what we're looking for. We need that. Let's start trading, right? And we added value right from day one, basically. For me personally, one of the biggest success story was, of course, our first client. You get this platform done, you invested a lot of time and passion and everything, and you want to know if it works. And with the initial version, we have been really good compared to a big player in Europe. So basically on par with them in the first version that was some months old. And this was for us very important to get the indication, okay, like okay, we invested some months, so basically we're on the right track, right? We have a ton of ideas and we have a roadmap over years if we want. So that was rather for us as a company interesting. We had other clients that was easier, where we kind of added 50, 60, 70% to the existing spot revenue, because they were not fully into that algorithmic intraday trading. So it really depends on where your partner and customer starts, right? If they invested 4 years in algo trading, it's tougher to get a bigger share. If it's somebody who says, okay, until now I stopped day ahead, it's easy to gain 40, 50%. That's a no-brainer.
Well, cool. So I have enjoyed this journey. You've taken us all over the place. I think it's given me a little bit of a light what you do. I've seen you around the industry now for a few years and didn't really understand what you did. And now I think I have a pretty good clear what you do. I loved your story about making things simpler and changing the message, because as a founder myself, same exact message. I think that's just, if you're doing technology and energy, that message resonates to any of the founders listening, because I know we did the same thing, removing every hurdle, make the message simple, and it does work. That strategy does get attention. So I'd have to agree with you there. But thank you so much for being on the program. Johan, do you have any final thoughts?
Well, thank you, Juergen, for being on. I think, going back to my introduction, I think we ticked the boxes of what I was expecting, but more. I agree with Chris on the simplicity, and especially as we discussed in some of the episodes here today, is the future. So there are new people coming on to this market that are not energy savvy. So simplify, combine, and I think we're looking for a good future. Great having you on.
Thanks, guys. It was a pleasure.
And thank you. And to our audience, you've enjoyed another episode of Insider's Guide to Energy. If you like the content, you want to find out more, follow us, subscribe, and please share us with your friends. We look forward to speaking to you again next week. Bye-bye.